40.
And then
Okay,
don't worry, I'll edit everything.
good.
So random conversations will be part of the recording at the end.
Okay.
Okay. And I have a couple of questions, but hopefully during the interview you don't have to stick to the questions if you have any interesting stories or memories or if something obscure and something that you just remember kind of pops in, and then you can just say, hey, I remember this one thing, you know?
Okay.
These are one of the most interesting things about the oral history reports is just the random every... Yeah, exactly.
Okay. Do
So...
you want my name and age and...
Oh, that's a good thing. So, you can tell to the camera... Actually, no, I should ask you that question. So, what's your name and how old are you?
My name is Nancy Johnson, and I am 87 years old.
Wow. You look 20. Just saying.
Thank you.
And let's see. I guess we can just start the interview now that we know who you are.
Okay.
So, how old were you when World War II had started?
I was 14.
Mm-hmm.
Uh-huh.
And
I remember exactly where I was.
where were you?
I was in bed. I was sick at home as my family went to church on Sunday morning, and I was listening to the radio. So I knew about it, I think, before they did. I don't know if the minister ever announced it in church or if he even knew. But I was in bed and heard that Pearl Harbor had been bombed.
And did you know anyone in Pearl Harbor or in Hawaii?
Not at the time, no. Didn't at that time. I had never been to Hawaii. I'd never had any desire to go, even though I was brought up in Southern California.
Mm-hmm.
And then finally in later years when I went there and I thought, ooh, what I missed all those years. Yeah.
So you have been to Hawaii?
Oh,
then,
many
in that sense,
times
then?
now. Many
Okay.
times.
Have you gone to Pearl Harbor then?
Oh, yes. Been there twice, out on the Arizona.
Mhm.
Yep. Seen that memorial.
Very cool.
Very, very moving. Think of all the boys' lives that were lost that morning. Yep. And we knew it was coming.
Yeah.
Roosevelt knew it was coming.
I heard about that. So was the public surprised then that Pearl Harbor was bombed?
We weren't supposed to know. And the Japanese, the ambassadors were back in Washington trying to negotiate some kind of a peace deal with Roosevelt. I don't know the details of that. But anyhow, they were back there. But the feeling, certainly with Roosevelt, was, that's what we heard, was that he wanted America to get into the war because he knew that that would be the only way that we would finally win.
Yeah. To be able to get into the war. And it was interesting because it was with the Japanese, but then obviously that got us into the conflict
Yes,
in Europe.
exactly.
Mm-hmm.
Exactly. What do you know about World War II?
Oh my goodness. Well, I studied it a little while ago. Let's see. Definitely started with the Pearl Harbor.
Mm-hmm.
And then some major events I remember is the Normandy D-Day. That was pretty big. That was
Yes.
at the end of the war,
That's
though.
right. That was toward the end.
Yeah, and then, let's see. I guess what we studied mostly was the conflict in Europe.
Yes.
And definitely with the Holocaust and why we sort of entered the war as well as to try to stop the Nazis
Mm-hmm.
from taking control.
Do you know about the Lend-Lease program?
No, I don't know about
Oh, well, that was a program that Roosevelt had because the American people, supposedly, I don't know, I don't know, I'm just throwing it out there,
Mhm.
but that we had been an isolationist country after World War I
Yeah.
with Woodrow Wilson, and stay out of the foreign conflict, stay out.
that. Especially after World War I, right?
Yes,
Yeah.
after World War I. And anyhow, so Roosevelt, as I said, knew that we had to get in sooner or later.
Mhm.
But the American people, we didn't want to send equipment and so forth, so we didn't sell them things, quote unquote.
Mhm.
We leased them equipment, we leased them ships, we leased them airplanes. Of course, I'm sure we never got paid for them, but this was called a lend-lease.
Oh.
We will lend it to you in Britain.
Mhm.
We'll send you all of these munitions and equipment and things, and then you can lease it from us.
I see. Kind of
But-
like a business deal.
Yeah, but it was really helping to arm Britain before America
Right.
got into the war. Now, once we got into the war, after Pearl Harbor and the next day when we declared war against Germany, then it was okay to send stuff over there because
Right.
we were at war. But prior to that, I'm just guessing maybe a year, we were leasing them equipment because they needed our supplies desperately.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. So then, I'm supposing before we had entered the war, then we only leased them to like Britain. Not Germany. Or
Oh, no.
Definitely
No.
not.
We had been sending all of our scrap iron over to Japan, which they put
Really?
in the bombs. Oh yeah, this is long before the war.
Okay.
But they were buying our scrap metal.
Which they probably used at
They
some
probably
point.
did.
Oh man. Okay.
Okay.
Very interesting detail there. I hadn't really remembered that. What's the next question? So I guess my question was, what was your earliest memory regarding the war? And obviously that would be when you found out about it.
Exactly, that very first morning. And then I was very lucky because I had parents that were very educated. They had both graduated from college back in it was about right after World War I is when they graduated from college. And so college and education was very important. So we had a little breakfast room at the house that they had built in 1940, and we moved there just before World War II started. But in this breakfast room, there was a blank wall that was by our little table, and my father had put up a map first in Europe when we were fighting in Europe. And every night we would, of course, gather around the table and eat dinner, and they would discuss with us three girls what had happened in the war that they had heard about.
Oh, like everyday events. So
Yeah,
the current
but of course
events.
we had the newsreels that if we would go to the, don't you bite me?
Not allowed.
I'm talking to Gabby.
Oh my goodness.
No,
I think she's trying to act out the war.
she wants attention.
Attention nader.
But they would point out, and I think we had pins, I don't really recall, but where the line was, and you could go to the movie and you'd see the newsreels, but those were at least 2 weeks old.
Right.
And then the newspapers would publish things, because of course they did have the short wave, the radio,
Radios, yeah.
and so we could get the news that way from the papers. But they would discuss it, so we were kept apprised of the war a little bit.
So we weren't so distant. There's something.
Right,
distance
right.
something
And then
yeah.
we had friends of my parents that were in the war. Their children were in the war. I remember a neighbor that lived behind us that were friends of my parents, and he was in the Navy, and he was in one of the ships that was sunk at Midway. And so it became very real then. And then I had a very dear friend that was in the Marine Corps from Long Beach, where we would spend our summers. And he was in the first wave that would go ashore and get rid of the landmine, not the landmines, the mines that were in the water.
Oh, they put mines in the water?
Oh yeah. In Europe, I had heard that they had, this is how dumb some of the young people were in those days, but they had lobsters that were like mines, but they didn't realize that when you cook before you cook a lobster, the lobsters are like a green, they blend in with the stuff on the bottom of the ocean.
Yeah.
After you cook them, they turned orange.
Or orange, yeah.
Orangey red, yeah. So they'd put all these mines in the ocean that were orangey red.
That's smart. And it's like, that's not a lobster.
Yeah, exactly.
Oh my
But
goodness.
anyhow, Paul's job was to detonate these mines, and one of them went on under him.
Oh.
And one of his buddies pulled him to shore. But he had all the shrapnel through his body, which we had sent to the Japanese. He was Guadalcanal. And so then he came home from the war in 1942, so very soon, because he was very badly wounded.
Yeah.
He lost one eye, and he had shrapnel all through
his
him.
legs, especially.
Well, yes, and it kept working its way out over the years.
Over the years, so
Yeah,
every once in a while something would just come out, or?
I don't know for how many years afterwards, but I know that he and his buddy after the war went on their motorcycles down to South America, and he had some shrapnel work his way out of his legs, I think, or his
Oh my
knee.
goodness.
Yeah, well, they were on the trip, so it was, deep things.
Yeah.
It takes a while for the body to reject it. And
It's
whatever.
surprising after the war, I guess, was over, and you still have a little bit of
Yeah.
the war with you.
oh yeah, well, he carried it his life because he had a cornea transplant. One of his eyes had gone.
Oh, the one that wasn't.
The left eye.
left eye.
Yeah, he lost sight in it, and so. But anyhow, that's another
A
story.
lot of sacrifice.
So anyhow, that brought it very close to home because in the summertime down at Long Beach, where we were down there. Can I divert and
Of
tell
course,
you a
tell
story?
me any stories.
Okay.
I love stories.
Well, we had blackouts because we were close. It was Long Beach,
Mhm.
and we were at Alamitas Bay, which was way at the far end of Long Beach, down by Seal Beach.
Okay.
And so, of course, you could see it. Ships at sea could see in reflection from the light. So everybody that I don't know how many miles it was close to the shore, and we had to have blackout drapes and curtains so that you didn't show any light out, because we didn't want to silhouette
Mhm.
things for the submarines out at sea.
For them to be able to see, oh, that's where the houses are. That's where the people are.
Well, I think it was the ships at sea mostly.
Okay.
And the submarines, because of course Long Beach, even in those days, was quite a shipping port,
Mhm.
and so a lot of the ships would come into Long Beach.
Oh yeah, definitely.
Yeah, and so we had Mother in the summertime, and we had a room that was not quite as wide as this deck,
Okay.
and about from here to the end, and it was windows all the way around. And so she had to make drapes for all of
those
the
windows.
There were quite a few,
Oh,
quite a
man.
few. Yeah, but what was it, about 16 feet by 10 feet maybe?
All the windows.
Yeah,
tiny
36, yeah, 16, 32, 42 feet of windows,
Mhm.
about with black. And then we had the other windows in the other
Right,
part
all
of the house.
all the houses.
So, yeah, so that was a little sidebar.
How about cars? Because I remember reading at
Oh.
some point they had to black out the lights in the cars.
We
too?
drove with dim outs.
Oh, okay, dim outs.
And I remember I was in the big band era with Tommy Dorsey and Jimmy Dorsey, and
Mhm.
I never saw Glenn Miller, but I saw Harry James and Gene Krupa, and you
Were they
probably never heard
musicians?
of these names.
Musicians or
They
artists?
had bands.
Okay. Okay.
It was called the big band era,
Mhm.
and they'd have a leader, and there'd maybe be 30 members of the bands. And they would go and they'd play at the Palladium in Hollywood,
Ooh.
or they'd play down in Long Beach. They had these big dance halls in
Mhm.
those days, and so we would drive down to Laguna Beach, Balboa it was rather, Balboa, and we would drive from Long Beach in the summer down to Balboa, which was 15 miles along the coast highway. There was only oil wells, no houses. I was just down there a month ago, and it's now solid built up.
Really? So
Oh.
completely different
Oh.
then.
I wouldn't have recognized it otherwise.
Oh,
No.
man, wow.
No, but we would drive with dim outs on. So you'd go about 15 miles an hour
Mhm.
because the dim headlights didn't show very far.
Right.
And of course, we only got 12 gallons of gas a month on an A coupon. Gas was rationed.
Oh yeah, I was gonna ask about the rations. So
Yeah.
gas is rationed. You probably couldn't drive around as much. Nope.
No, we got 12 gallons a month on an A card, and we had 2 cars because my dad needed a car on weekends because his best friend was blind. And so my father would take him someplace on the weekend, so that we called him Uncle, but he wasn't related, so that Uncle George could get away and do some things.
Yeah.
But Uncle George had a friend that was out toward the Mojave Desert someplace who had a farm of some kind, and on this farm they were allowed more gallons of gas
Makes
because
sense,
they
yeah.
had to use their equipment for agriculture and so forth. And as I remember it, he had his own gas pump out there. So we only needed enough gas to get out there,
Right.
and then his friend could fill up our car for the trip back.
Oh wow.
But yeah, so that was it was a Willis, which was a British-made car. It was about the size of a little Volkswagen Bug,
Mhm.
but it was square.
Kind of like the cube cars that they have now.
Yes, a little bigger than the smart car, but
Mhm.
more like the Mini Cooper that we have now,
Yeah.
with a straight back. At one time, we had 13 kids inside of that.
Oh my goodness.
I know.
All stuffed in there.
But what we would do with gas rationing, 12 gallons per car, because
Mm-hmm.
that was the least amount. We had no priorities.
Right.
So what we do is we put both cars in our double garage, and we had a little tube, and which you're not supposed to do this because of the taste, but we would siphon the gas. We'd suck on the tube until you could taste the gas come out the tube, and then we'd put it into the other car. So we could siphon it. We had a Nash, which would probably get about, 14 miles to the gallon or whatever.
Mhm.
And the Willis would get like a Volkswagen would. It would probably get 25 or 30 miles to the gallon.
That's actually pretty good.
But the tanks were small,
Oh, okay.
8, 10 gallons. Don't quote me on these figures because
Okay.
I was not a car mechanic. I'm not a doctor. So I'm just throwing out a guesstimate
Right.
of how many gallons. But
Mhm.
so we'd drive this little Willis around. And I remember too, during the war, we went to the Pasadena Presbyterian Church.
Mhm.
And we lived on a street called Los Robles, which went all the way through up to Pasadena.
Mhm.
But there was no bus on our street. The next street over had a bus on it. But my mother would go up early because she was in charge of getting the boys, the service boys, that wanted to go home for dinner to somebody's house. And so she would find the people
Mhm.
who had said, yes, we'll take 2 boys for dinner, or we'll take 3 boys, or we'll take 1. So she would greet the boys as they would come into church. And would you like to go home for dinner to somebody's house?
That's sweet.
And then she'd match them up. But she'd have to be there early because the first people would come, the boys and so forth.
Yeah.
So I remember her standing on the corner of our street, pretending like she was looking for the bus to come.
Oh my goodness.
She was
Acting
hitchhiking.
skills. Yeah.
Without actually putting her thumb out.
So, yeah.
But in those days, of course, it was also safe to hitchhike.
Yeah.
Wasn't like
Yeah,
today.
it's different.
And yeah, the people that they were held in institutions that were mentally deficient, and the low IQ people, the ones that are now committing the crimes.
Yeah.
It seems like, and so we had hospitals for them,
Asylums, right? I think,
asylums,
yeah.
and it wasn't like today at all.
Mhm.
But anyhow, she would pretend like she was hitchhiking, and she'd always get a ride.
Of course.
And then we'd come up later in the Nash
Mhm.
because we'd have to bring home at least 2 service boys with us.
Okay.
My dad usually didn't go to church, but Mom would be up there, and us 3 girls. My older sister was now 16 or about 17 this time. She was 2 years older, so she could drive. And so Mother would always pick the cutest boys.
Oh yeah, I was gonna ask.
Yeah, and so anyhow, we'd have boys every Sunday for dinner, which was mid-afternoon, about 2 o'clock in the afternoon.
Do you still keep in contact with any of them? Or
Oh no,
They just come and go.
yeah.
Sort of.
Well, yeah, they were looking for a home-cooked meal, I think, and I used to work in high school though. The church, the Pasadena Presbyterian Church, had rented a storefront right on the corner by the church, and they made it into like a USO. And so I and my girlfriends would go up there on Saturday night, and we would be out in the kitchen making sandwiches for the boys.
Oh yeah.
And just as fast as we could go.
Just gonna
making
assembly
sandwiches.
line basically. of
Yes,
those
it was,
things.
exactly. And so the older girls, we were like 15 and 16 and too young to really associate too much with the boys.
Oh, okay.
But we had friends at Caltech that were in the Navy. They were in the V-12. Do you know what that is?
No, I don't. Can you explain about it?
Yeah, V-12 was a program they had during the war where the government sent people to college. And so if you were in the service and you were college age, I don't know what the criteria was, but they would get to go to college and paid for by the government. And
It's
it
like
was
the
called-
GI Bill, kind of.
Well, it was before the GI Bill,
Okay.
but the GI Bill came after the war
Okay.
for the boys that had been in the service. Like my husband had been a pilot. I can tell you about that. And so he went to Stanford and went through law school on the GI Bill. But this was during the war, and it was called the V-12. Maybe it stood for Veterans 12. I don't know. I've never thought of where the name came from. But anyhow, and when I went to college, we had, what was it? We had 90 civilian men on campus, a total normally of 1,200. I went to Occidental, which is a suburb of Los Angeles, up at Eagle Rock, between Glendale and Pasadena.
I know where Pasadena is.
Yeah, you know where Glendale is? It's west of Pasadena.
Okay.
And in between is a little community called Eagle Rock.
Mm-hmm.
Now,
And
this is off the tape, okay?
Okay, off the tape.
And that's
Off
where
the tape.
that's where B.O. went to college.
Oh, really? Barack Obama?
Oh, you know who he is.
Of course.
Have I asked you that question before?
No, you had. Well,
You're the
B.O.
first
is?
one that would say that they. I ask people, I make that comment.
You
Well,
say
that's
B.O.?
where B.O. And I said, you know who B.O. is, don't you? No.
Who's the-
No.
Well, I didn't know.
I said, well, he's very well known. He's known by people around the world.